Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Let's Talk Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Robert Smith, along with my co-host, Adam Carver-Stelman. Today, we'll be going through our 2023 defensive line draft prospects. Adam, let's talk Seahawks.
Let's talk D-line. These are the big boys. Look, we've gone through all the offensive positions. Now we're on to our defensive positions. We've already done edge. We kind of talked about how deep that is. This is another one of those positions, though, that defensive tackle, where I think you're going to be able to find contributors all the way through the draft. I mean, maybe not the guy I'm going to talk about because I'm not really sure that my guy's going to get drafted. He could. He's got the skill set. I think he can do it. But I certainly think that all your guys are draftable, have draftable grades, and I think we'll see some of them go in that like 6-7 range. So it's a good class, man. There are. Even though I think a lot of people have been talking about how there's not quite as much elite talent at the top of this draft, there is talent all the way through, though. This is a deep, deep, deep draft class, and I'm surprised every time we do one of these positions how many guys I find where I'm like, oh, that's another guy you could be taking a look at. So,
yeah, so let's get this started. So as you can see, we're going to do our top 10. And the way this top 10 is structured, Adam and I will both reveal our true top 5 rankings. So both of those together makes a 10. But then we're going to expand on that and provide 3 players that we see in those middle rounds, that 3rd, 4th, 5th round area. And then a couple players that we like later on in the draft, maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, or undrafted free agent type of guys. So without further ado, let's take a look at our number 10 players, the first one in the late rounds. I have Jonah Tavai out of San Diego State, and Adam went with Jacob Slade out of Michigan State, I believe.
You are correct, Michigan State.
So I really like players who came from other sports or changed positions, guys that are just versatile and can use that athleticism in different ways. So Jonah Tavai I believe he's out of Samoa. I don't know if it's American Samoa or Western Samoa. But he's a former rugby player. And he has really good bloodlines. He has a lot of family members who are either currently in the NFL, who were in the NFL for a little bit, or were high-level college players. So former rugby player, love it. I love that athleticism. I love the tackling, that technique that comes from being a rugby player, because they're a whole lot more strict about illegal high tackles or illegal low tackles, which means you get a lot of really clean mid-body wrap up, good secure tackling. And as a defensive coach, that's something that I absolutely love, when you go in and somebody has really good technique and now you can work on that next step of fundamentals. He's not a tall guy. 6 foot, 190, 95 pounds, right around there.
295, not 195. 295.
Yes, 295. We're talking about the big boys today.
He would be the smallest defensive tackle ever drafted.
There you go.
195 pounds.
Thank you. Sorry, I was ranking cornerbacks today, and so I kind of have smaller guys on my mind. But yeah, so 290, 295 pounds, right around there. I like to think of him as a shorter Quentin Jefferson. I think is a really good mock, and I don't really do player comparisons, but really good use of leverage. You know, in football, there's that saying, a low man wins, and he's a really good example of that. He has that low center of gravity, and he just drops that hip. He goes through guys. In the run game, he anchors really well, and guys can't push him back. So really interesting guy, undersized, like I said. I think he's a defensive end in a 3-4. So he's going to play that 4-eye or 5 technique. He could kick into a 3-tech in 4 down front, but that's going to be about as far in as he goes. You don't really ever want him rushing into that A gap unless there's a stunt that the team is doing. So I really like him. Gotta love that cross sport versatility.
Yeah, look, I mean, I went back, and because this is a guy that you and me have talked about a couple of times, and so I had to kind of go back and watch a little bit of tape on him. He's a tough dude. Yeah, you want to talk? He's one of those guys that really gets into like that sumo stance, where he's just way down in his hips. They're really sunk. His butt's anchoring him. The only problem, he's a little slow getting his hands up, so his contact's a little slow. He tends not to engage right until somebody already has hands on him. And I mean, once he's engaged, and he can definitely power through. But that's one thing that I think needs to be worked on a little bit, is just his hand placement and getting that punch, and a couple of those other, especially if we want him to contribute to the pass rush, to kind of be able to get that punch in it and shift and make his the guy that he's going up against have to change his weight. But I like Adetomiwa. I mean, if we're not gonna get that, big anchor, run stopping guy early in the draft, he's definitely one of those guys that they could take a look at on day 3.
Yeah, I definitely see him more as a 5th, 6th rounder than a true end of the draft type of guy. I mean, he had sustained production every year in college. If you look at his last 3 years, he was over an 80 grade by PFF in all 3 of those years. Last year, 2022, he knocked it out of the park. I mean, he had a 92 overall grade by PFF, which included an 87.9 run defense grade and a 92.2 pass rush grade. I mean, he really played clean, and that included even against some higher opponents. He's not like some of these players who has a high grade or a good profile, good stats, because they tore it up against lesser opponents. He scored over a 90. This is one of his best games of the year, a 90.5 against the University of Arizona. Right. So he went into a Pac-12 school and he cleaned up and was probably the best player on the field. So he can step up. I really like him as that late round prospect who can actually challenge for a roster spot.
Yeah, I like to have him.
So how about Jacob Slade?
Jacob Slade. So this is a guy who I can't remember who I was going back and trying to look at tape on. It was an offensive lineman. So Jacob Slade from Michigan. From Michigan State. His Big Ten guy. So obviously got to face some good competition. This is a guy who's a 5-year or 5th-year senior. So he's a ton of experience. Unfortunately, his last year was cut a little bit short with injuries. He had a nagging lower leg issue that held him out for I think 4 or 5 games last year. Which obviously hurt his numbers a little bit. But this guy just, you look at him from the back, this guy just looks like a defensive lineman. He is just like it's literally from his shoulders down to his hips is just a brick. This guy has the widest, biggest backside I've seen in a long time. And because he's a big dude, he's a broad dude. Not the biggest guy, I guess, at 6'4", 285, 290 pounds. So he's definitely a little bit more muscle, but a lot of that weight is in his lower body. His legs and his backside are huge. So this guy is an anchor along that defensive line. The one thing that I noticed watching game tape on him is he does not get pushed back. He's quick to engage, great first step. Doesn't have a lot of pass rushing moves. I mean, doesn't have like a swim move, or there's not a lot of counter moves for him. But you're not going to move him once he digs his foot in and engages you. That's as far as that offensive lineman's going. So he is, if we're going to look for a guy that's got a lot of experience, we want to kind of bring in to, again, challenge for someone that's going to be an early run defender spot. Jacob Slade's a great guy to look at. Just if anybody has a chance, go back and look at some of his game tape, because literally you will never see him get pushed back. He is just bam. Once he engages, that's it. That's as far as that offensive lineman's going.
Which is great in the run game. Not so great in the pass rush game.
Yeah, I know.
But if he's used that way, he comes in on early downs, comes in on short yardage situations, a goal line specialist. There's a place for guys like that on a club. So if that roster spot's available, then he's definitely somebody who could fill a role. I see him. He's an experienced 3-year contributor. So they relied on him, and he positively added to the team every single game. He's a great effort and pursuit type of player. He is not going to give up at all. High motor is the term you hear a lot, and he's definitely one of those high motor guys. I see him as a 7th round, possibly priority undrafted free agent.
Yeah, if he sneaks in, it'll definitely be probably mid to late 7th round. I don't think he's going to go any earlier than that. But yeah, again, if they've waited and haven't really taken a lot of guys along that defensive interior line because of the other plethora of picks we've gotten, and this is again a deep draft class at several positions. So if they wait till late to find that anchor along the defensive line, he's definitely a guy that they could take a look at late in day 3.
Oh yeah. So going on to our number 9, I have Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky, and you have Elijah Simmons out of Texas. So Broderick Martin is somebody I looked at because specifically the Seahawks need to find somebody at nose tackle. Now, Broderick Martin has elite size. He's 6'5", 240 pounds, 34 plus inch arms, and a 7-foot wingspan. I mean, this guy is a mountain.
You keep shaving off 100 pounds from these guys. He's 340 pounds. He's not 240. This guy is 340. This is a massive man. 6'5", 340 pounds, certainly.
But yes, okay. 340. 6'5", 340, 34 plus inch arms, 7-foot wingspan. He is a guy who can really utilize power well when he's in his bull rush. Gets those power moves. He stacks and sheds when he needs to. He uses that 34-inch arm length in order to get out, get distance from that offensive lineman so that he can shed that block, fill the gap that he's responsible for. Great guy. He has experience 2-gapping, which is something that we definitely need in Seattle if they stick with this 3-down front next year. He is one of the few true nose tackles that's in this draft. I really like Broderick Martin.
Yeah, look, I mean, if this is another one of those things where if the Seahawks are going to stick with that 3-down, 3-down front, and we let go of all of the guys that played nose tackle for us last year. I guess we have one guy that's still on the roster, but he's probably not going to play next year, and if he does, he's not going to contribute early. So that's a big need. And there are obviously some guys that we'll get into a little bit later who can fill that nose tackle need earlier in the draft, but none of them are this size. Well, I shouldn't say that. One of them is this size, but for the most part, this is probably one of the bigger guys you're going to see. And yeah, if they again wait to address those needs along that defensive interior line, yeah, this is a guy they should definitely take a look at because he's a mountain of a man. You're not going to find a lot of guys at that size with that wingspan who can literally just take away 2 to 3 offensive linemen by themselves, and he can do it.
Definitely. So how about Elijah Simmons? I really wasn't familiar with him. I had to go back and find some tape to isolate him and read some additional scouting reports. But yeah, what do you like about Elijah Simmons?
Well, I mean, you know me. I mean, and I've said this a couple times. I mean, there are a few schools that I kind of watch every year. And having lived in Texas, I lived in Austin for a few years. And so I got to see some of these guys play. And this is a guy who really kind of stood out to me, and mainly stood out to me just because of his size. This is another one of those guys that is just wide. This guy is built low to the ground and built super, super wide. He didn't do a lot of 2-gapping, or he wasn't asked to do a lot of 2-gapping in college. So that's something he's going to have to learn going into the pros. But he's got the size to do it. He can definitely take on 2 blocks and plug some holes. This is a guy with a pretty decent amount of size. But yeah, you look at him. He's not as tall as Martin, but he is a broad dude. Didn't put up a lot of really obscene numbers in college, but kind of did everything pretty well. Obviously, he went against some, I guess you could call it lower competition, but this is still a guy who acquitted himself really well, both in the run and pass games. He doesn't add a ton of pass rush, but he can. I mean, this is a guy that can get after the quarterback if needed. It's another guy who's over 340 pounds. And yeah, again, if they want to wait till later to look at some of these guys to kind of fill that nose tackle position, this is another guy that they could look at, because this is just a big body dude who can eat up blocks and is really stout in the run game. He has a tendency to kind of sit a little bit high, which is a little, which is concerning when you have a guy that's, under 6'4", but he after engaging, he tends to counter pretty well. So he can make up for the fact that he's a little slow off that line.
All right. And then here it is. On the Let's Talk Seahawks podcast, we like to admit when we're wrong, and I'm going to own up to it. Made a mistake. Elijah Simmons out of the University of Tennessee.
Yeah, so, I wasn't gonna correct you, but
so you've got your Texas guy coming in later.
Yeah,
my apologies.
I
to him
That's
on
okay.
that.
I was just gonna go with it, but I'm glad you're the bigger man.
So he has very good strength. He is actually Tennessee's strongest football player. He benches ridiculous numbers. He squats ridiculous numbers. He legitimately was named Tennessee's strongest football player. With that, he uses that strength at the point of attack. When he engages with offensive linemen, they feel it. He is a force in the run game. Somebody who probably needs to work a little bit more on stack and shedding those blocks. But, you know, he has an adequate use of leverage, something else he could work on improving. But yeah, I see him as an undrafted free agent, but somebody with a little bit higher of potential. And you got to love those strength attributes that he brings to the table.
Yeah, again, 6'2", over 340 pounds, and he uses all of it. You can see it. He's a big boy.
All right, coming in at number 8, the start of our mid-round players. Here's where I have a Texas interior defensive lineman, and that's Keondre Coburn. This guy, real quick first step. As soon as that ball snapped, he is out of his stance in a flash, making people pay. He's really athletic, at least more athletic than you would expect from somebody who's over 330 pounds. There is one negative on him, and that's that he has a little bit shorter length. He's doesn't really have the length to stack up, get that offensive lineman away from him, and then shed to the appropriate gap. And so that's where I see him coming in to be somebody's nose tackle a challenge, because he doesn't have that true 2-gap body type. So a little bit of coaching. There are some tricks that can be used in order to make that a little more successful. But I like him. Once again, you don't see big men with that kind of athleticism.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Texas used him especially during this last year, I thought was really impressive, because basically what they did is line him up just off center of the or off of center, I guess I'm trying to say. So when he would push, because the guards were already engaged, because they had some other guys coming in up that line that those guys had to take on. So he was able to body the center one way or the other, because it wasn't lined directly up over him. He was schemed really well, so he looked really good in that scheme, which is why I think he's kind of falling a little bit, because nobody knows what he's going to look like outside that Texas scheme. But this is a guy that I really love too, again, because he is that just mountain of a guy. If the idea is to find someone to help us plug up those running lanes, this is a guy that can obviously do it with his size and his strength, because he's another really strong dude. He is going to have a little bit of trouble with those kind of fairly short arms. I think they're just over 30 inches. But again, if we're going to wait till later to kind of pick that guy that's going to be that nose tackle, line up over that that one spot or that zero spot and help plug up some of those run lanes, which we had trouble with last year, we could do a lot worse than Coburn.
Oh, for sure. And then I'm going to go ahead and reveal our number 7 players
because they're flipped, aren't they?
Because they're flipped. Yes. So my number 7 is your number 8, Zach Pickens out of South Carolina, and your number 7 is my number 8, Keondre Coburn out of Texas. So Zach Pickens, yeah, I see as a well-rounded defensive lineman. I think he can play kind of a gap shooting nose, not necessarily that run stuffer first, second down guy. But if you want to kick him over to nose for third down or a pass rush situation, he can definitely do that. I see him more as a 3 technique in a 4 down front, or a defensive end in 3-4. And that's because even though he's 6'4", he only weighs 290, 295. So he has room to put weight on his frame. But one of the things that really sticks out is he's a really athletic guy. He's someone who caught my attention at the combine. He ran really well. He was really fluid in the drill work. This is a guy who stood out, and for me was a combine riser because of how well he performed. So I don't know how much weight you want to put on him, if it's going to take away some of that athleticism that he was showing.
Yeah, I think you're right on right there, because again, he plays the way he plays that because that's where I think he's comfortable at, and that's where they like him at, because he does have that really good lateral movement and he's quick in pursuit. So you don't know what it's going to look like if he adds on another 10, 15 pounds to kind of shore up some of that strength. My biggest thing with him is he's definitely one of those guys that has a much bigger lower body than upper body. If you look at this guy in a suit, it's kind of funny. He's a little triangle-y. He doesn't have super broad shoulders. So if he's going to need to get in the weight room when he gets to whatever NFL facility and pack on some stuff on that chest and arms. He doesn't have a really strong punch. He's got strong hands, so if he gets a hold of a guy, he can definitely maneuver him. But his first initial punch isn't that. Unlike like the reason I had Coburn a little bit higher is because when Coburn hits you, you feel it. But Zach Pickens, like you said, is a very well-rounded player. This is another guy that the Seahawks have had into the facility. He was one of their top 30. What's the word I'm looking for? Interviews, visits. Yeah. Thank you, visits. That's the one. So this is the guy that the Seahawks are taking a look at for sure. And again, if they're going to wait, because I do think that Zach Pickens is a day 3 guy, but he's probably a late 4th round, early 5th round guy as opposed to later on in the later 5th, 6th, or 7th. But again, if they think that they can mold him and get him to kind of round out those areas where he's lacking a little bit, I think he could be a great player.
Yeah, 100%. That's why he's 7 on my board. So if we go to number 6, the last of our mid-round players, I have Jerrod Clark out of Coastal Carolina. And Adam, you have Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. So Jerrod Clark, he's probably my favorite defensive lineman. Just hands down, probably my favorite. I would say he's probably my favorite defender in this draft. He's a converted tight end. So he has that athleticism, brings it every time he's out there. He is a huge guy, and I don't have his height and weight written down for some reason on this notes, but that's probably good.
Just over 330.
There you go.
6'4", just over 330. He's a big dude.
I was going to say, maybe I subconsciously knew that I was going to shave 100 pounds off him. So I left it off these notes.
There you go.
But yeah, so converted tight end. And he showed that in drills at the combine and at his pro day. He had really fluid movements, really smooth movements. And for a guy who's over 330 pounds, that's money right there. That's gravy. He's a true nose tackle. And like I said before, there aren't very many of them in this draft. He's probably one of my top nose tackles in this draft, including guys I have ranked above him. If we're looking at just 2 gapping, 0 technique nose tackles, he might be my favorite nose tackle in this draft. He's got really good hand placement, powerful punch. I mean, you actually see offensive linemen rock from his hands when he makes contact, to the point where if you watch, some of these guys are so off balance that he's able to get more of a pass rush than you would expect from a man of his size, because his initial contact will knock these offensive linemen out of their stance. I like him over Siaka Ika, who I know you have higher rated than I do, because he has the ability to be a 3-down defensive lineman, and some of these other big nose tackles will probably be limited to just 2-down linemen for the rest of their careers. They're just on those run downs and situations. I think Jerrod Clark could develop into a 1-tech or a nose in a true pass rush situation as he gets some of this high-class NFL coaching.
Yeah, look, this is one of those guys that is another physical freak. I mean, guys are not supposed to be that big and strong and move that well. He's not. I'm not saying he's like a super fast guy. He's not. I mean, even for defensive lineman, he didn't have a really fast 40 at the combine. But when you look at him move, it's not because he's lumbering or running out of breath. That's just what his body carries. And when you have that much weight, and he's very proportionate too. This is not like I already talked about Zach Pickens needing to add a little more upper body strength. Jerrod Clark doesn't. Jerrod Clark's a broad guy, top and bottom, and it shows. I mean, you were talking about how he's a converted tight end. This guy is clearly an athlete. He looks like he's built well, top to bottom. And yeah, like you said, he's got a pretty good first punch, and part of that might be because he's got 34-inch arms, and when you have that much length and firepower behind it, that hit's going to hurt. Yeah, you were talking about, or we had talked about how even though interior defensive line is a fairly deep position in the draft, true nose tackles are hard to find. There's just not a lot of guys that are built that strong and that big that can take on, multiple blocks or two gap like that. So that's a little bit more of a thin position. And if the Seahawks are going to stick that way, there's only a few guys I think they can definitely plug in from there, especially if they want to take a guy early. And so, yeah, Jerrod Clark's one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge fan. I was trying to pull up his numbers. My computer's running a little slow, but big fan. In fact, I think after the draft, I probably talked Adam's ear off about Jerrod Clark for quite a while. So sorry about that, but I really.
All right, I knew I should have known it was coming.
All right, so you have Keeanu Benton as your number 6. I'm a little higher on him. We'll see him here in a minute. But why do you like Keeanu Benton so much?
This is just another really well-rounded defensive tackle. Now, he's definitely not built like a true nose tackle. I don't think that's an impossible thing for him to be. I mean, he's got the length, he's got the wingspan, he's certainly got the strength to do it. He'll probably need to pack on a few pounds. He runs a little bit lighter, just over 300 pounds. I think he was rated like 312 or 310 at the combine. But you go back and watch Wisconsin tape, and there are a few guys that are that ferocious down after down after down. He gives 100% on every single play. I have never seen a guy that can go that long and not be winded. He never wants to come out. This is a guy that does not want to be pulled off the field. And that kind of drive is not something you teach. I honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I don't think that he doesn't have any one thing that he does really, really well. He's very good at a lot of stuff. If there was one thing that you just want to highlight, it's his drive. And that's why he's a little bit lower for me than I think he is for you, because he doesn't have that one aspect of his game where you go, hey, this guy's elite at that thing. But as far as drive goes, there are a few guys that have as much drive as Keeanu Benton.
Yeah, I really like him. In fact, he's my number 5, so we'll see him here in a minute. But I see him as a 3 tech at the NFL level. Other draft analysts who are out there, they've been referring to him as a nose tackle for this whole process, and I don't know where they're seeing that, because there's no way he's a nose tackle. He is. I mean, it's legit. He's 300 pounds. He doesn't stack and shed very well. He is not a 2-gap player, nor does he have experience playing the 2-gap technique. He's a very good pass rusher. He is one of the better pass rushers for guys over 300 pounds in this entire draft. But he's only a solid run defender. He's somebody who's average as a defensive lineman at run defending, and you don't want that at your nose. Your nose needs to shut down the 2 A gaps. And he's kind of flipped in his skill set. But I think he'd be an amazing 3 technique. He's athletic enough. He could play defensive end in a 3-4. There's a lot that Keeanu Benton can do. One negative, and this goes back to that run defending. He can really get off of his anchor point in the run game. When he sets up and he's trying to get to the point where he can make space with that offensive lineman and watch what's going on in the backfield so he can shed, he tends to get knocked off of that anchor point, and now his feet are moving backwards, and that's not what you want your defensive lineman doing when the other team is running the ball at his face. So let's see. So like I said, he's my number 5. Your number 5 is Siaki Ika, who I commented on earlier, but I know you're really high on this player out of Baylor.
Look, I mean, the reason I'm so high on Siaki Ika is because it seems like the Seahawks are going to stick with that 3-4 front. And what they need, the thing that we don't have, nothing against Al Woods. Al Woods was a great player for us, but he's a 36-year-old NFL player, and he's not an every down player. You could see when Al Woods got gassed during games, we had him out there way too much, and it was only because we didn't have a guy that was built like him to back him up. Well, Siaki Ika is built like him. This is a very, very big, very strong guy that knows how to throw his weight around. If we're looking for another guy that's just going to be plugging up that hole and making sure that, look, this center or whatever guard's going to be pushing to open up run lanes is not going to be able to do it, then there's not a lot of guys that can, you can't teach size that's like Siaki Ika has. And it's not just his size, because he's not super tall. He's 6'3". He's not super huge. He's only like 340 again. He's not any bigger than any of the other guys we talked about, but it's the way that weight sits on him. He is a wide behemoth of a man. And you can't move him. He's another one of those guys that in the run game, you're not going to be able to push him off. Once he anchors and engages, you're not going to be able to push him back. And the other thing I like about him is that he's shown growth in his pass rush abilities. Over the last 2 years, he's increased his quarterback hurries and his sacks. And I know that you're not as high on him as I am, but I don't think we've seen the ceiling for Siaki Ika. And if he can get into a place where he doesn't have to be the focus like he was at Baylor, because he didn't have a lot of help on that interior defensive line at Baylor. He was the guy everyone focused on. He was getting double and triple teamed almost every single down. And if we can take the pressure off him with some of the guys that we have and looking at the guys that should be flanking him in that 3-down front, we've got the guys to do it. He could be a fantastic player for the Seahawks if we just want to plug him in at that nose tackle position and let other guys handle collapse in that bucket.
Yeah, I was really excited to see him at the combine, but he did not have a very good combine.
He did not.
Nobody thought he was going to be Mr. Athletic Freak when he came in there that day, and that's not his game. So everybody knew that, but he came in. And he weighed in, and first thing is he weighed in at right around 330 pounds, which was a shock. But then he tested like a guy who was 360. So we were expecting, okay, so we're going to get this real big guy. He's going to come in over 350. And then he came in lighter. And we're like, oh, well, that must just be pre-combine workouts. He's slimming down to improve his numbers, to try to up his stock a little bit. And then he came in and he tested like everybody thought he would test, but now he's not as big as they thought that he was. So that put a lot of question marks in people's head. Good things, though. He's an experienced 2-gap nose tackle. He is one of the better stack and shed guys in this class. He is somebody I would trust to be a 2-gap nose tackle. He's not my number 1 nose tackle, but he is up there on the list. Once again, he's a 2-down lineman. He's not going to play on 3rd down. He's not going to play in pass rush situations. He is a true run stuffing nose tackle. And he plays with this power, with this strength at the point of attack that is just nasty. Like, he is a force to be reckoned with there in the middle of a defense.
Yeah, like I said, if the Seahawks are really, really going to stick with this 3-down front, they need some meat in the middle. And there's not a lot of guys that have more meat than Siaki.
No. That is a big boy. All right, coming in at number 4. Another guy with some size is Mazi Smith out of Michigan, my number 4. And your number 4 is someone who does not have a lot of size, and that's Kalijah Kancey out of Pitt. So Mazi Smith, I want to like Mazi Smith more than I do, and that's not just because I have Ohio State ties. So it's like some deep-seated Michigan hatred here. But, he's still my number 4 player. I am high on him. He's not a true NFL-ready nose tackle. He struggles with double teams. And you can't struggle with double teams at college if that's what you're billed as being for the NFL, because every offensive lineman in the NFL is better than any offensive lineman you faced in college. So now imagine 2 of those guys coming at you. It throws up a little bit of red flags for me, but that's something that is coachable. They'll get in there and they'll see, okay, what's his functional strength? It looks like he plays with some pretty good strength. So maybe it's just a technique issue. Is this an arm length issue? They'll go through and they'll find out exactly how they can get him better at shedding those double teams. But that's the main sticking point for me and why he's 4 and not higher on my list. He is a really good 1-gap penetrator. So he's somebody I see, okay, maybe he plays a little bit of, I really hate this 2-down lineman front that a lot of NFL teams are doing. It comes out of this Vic Fangio tree, which is trash, but that's an argument for another day.
We should really just do an episode on Robbie's reasons to hate the Vic Fangio defense. Because he's got a list, guys. He's got a long one.
I do. But yeah, so he's a good one gap penetrator. in that particular set, they put 2 down linemen. They have 2 guys standing up outside of him. A lot of times, one of those guys is designated as a one-gap penetrator. It's kind of what the Seahawks went to when they realized they didn't have the
2 gapping
personnel
players
and or the coaching for having 2 gapping defensive linemen. So they schemed it so they kind of had an offset 4-3 with a rusher. But he could fill that role right now, and he could be really good at it. So he could come in as a bigger 3 tech or as a guy who's designated to go specifically as a 1 tech who's going to just play in that A gap. Really strong, really athletic at the point of attack. His first step is quicker than I've seen in a long time. For his size, he can catch offensive linemen off balance, and that's because that first step is just quick and explosive, and he's in that offensive lineman before they have a chance to set their hands. So for an offensive lineman like Joe Tittman, who we're both actually pretty high on, but one negative on him is he has slow hands. Mazi Smith is somebody who could really get inside of him and work him because he's not going to have his hands up in time. And that's really what he brings, is that quickness and that strength. And that's kind of why I like Mazi Smith and why he's my number 4.
Yeah, I mean, you know me. I've got Mazi Smith is going to be a little bit higher up on my list. I love Mazi Smith, and the reason I love Mazi Smith is because this guy plays with an aggressiveness, and I don't want to say anger because I don't know him personally. He might not be a mad person, but this guy's ferocious on the football field. This is one of those guys that you do not want to be lined up across because he's going to hurt you. He wants you to feel him coming at you every single time, and that first quick step he's got is like a cannonball coming out of a cannon. I guess that was really clunky, guys. I got to work on these metaphors, but yeah, he's just mean, and that's why I like him. There are a few guys that play with that kind of ferocity that are that big, and also if you listen to the guys at Michigan, he's a great locker room guy. So the fact that he's that good of a guy in the locker room and plays with that kind of mean streak on the field, it's hard not to love that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now you have Kalijah Kancey, I would say the ultimate riser coming out of the combine, at least in this defensive line group. Why do you have Kalijah Kancey as your number 4?
Because he's not, he doesn't have the length or the height to be higher. Look, if Kalijah Kancey wasn't this compact dude and he's not a small guy. He's over 6 foot. He's over 280 pounds. Not a little guy. But compared to some of the other guys on this list, he's a little guy, and that's why I can't have him any higher. Because it's very rare for a guy of his size to be able to come out and his build too. I don't know if you have him on your side of the list at all or not. I don't know if we're going to talk about him more later, but I do want to say the reason this guy is such a big riser is because of the comparables that he's getting to a certain other undersized Pitt defensive tackle named Aaron Donald. And look, he's not Aaron Donald. There are no other Aaron Donalds. Aaron Donald's a unicorn, but he put up some pretty similar numbers in his college career to Aaron Donald's college career. Now the difference is Aaron Donald is not built like a normal human being. Aaron Donald has one of those V frames at 280 pounds. That doesn't exist. Nobody his Aaron Donald's size should have a 28-inch waist. That shouldn't happen. Somehow it did with Aaron. It's probably not 28 inches, but if you look at his shoulders compared to his waist, it looks like it's probably 28 inches. That's not Kalijah Kancey. Kalijah Kancey is definitely more of a lower body build guy. He's much big, big legs, big hips. He's not a fat guy. He doesn't have a huge waist, but he's definitely built bigger in the lower half than he is the upper half. And if he was 6'4", I'd have him higher on the list. I would. There's this whole talk about low man wins in the trenches, and he does that really well. The problem is he doesn't play like a guy that's 6'1". He tries to look. I get it. I know what it's like being a shorter guy. You want to go out there. You want to show that you're just as tough and just as big as those other guys. Sometimes that can bite you in the butt, though. And I think with him, a lot of times it did because he doesn't want to get really low in his stance. He wants to match shoulder to shoulder and be face to face with the guy he's lined up against. And mirroring can be a little bit of a negative when it comes to guys along the defensive line, because if you can't get low and move that guy using your center of gravity, it's going to be a detriment. It didn't hurt him a lot in his college career. He still had excellent numbers. But if you watch and you can see him go up against some of these bigger guys, he tries to get taller in his stance just to be able to see them eye to eye. And I think that's going to hurt him in the big leagues.
100%. Yeah, like I said, this guy, he weighed in. You said 6'1", and that was the big question mark going into the combine. Everybody thought he was going to be like Poona Ford at 5'10". They're like, okay, he's small, and he came in at 6'1". Now, that's not really something you can fake. He's not Bryce Young out there drinking a gallon of water before his weigh-in.
Right.
You can't really...
lifts in his shoes. I don't know.
Yeah. He may have had those gravity boots, like that contraption that flips you upside down to help decompress your spine.
Yeah.
Went and saw the chiropractor beforehand.
Just hung upside down for 2 days before the combine.
But he answered that question. That question was, we've never really had defensive tackles who are small who get drafted. And he answered that question saying, I'm underweight, but I'm over 6 feet. So check that box. But elite athleticism. He is just over 280 pounds, and he ran a 4.67 40. I mean, that's faster than 2/3 of the tight end group. And he's doing it as an interior defensive lineman. Just like you said, he's a much better pass rusher than he is a run defender, has a tendency to get high. You don't need to look a man in the eye. You have leverage. Just put him on his butt, right? He is going to be a penetrating 3-tech, 4-eye, or 5-tech. I don't want to see him in at nose. I think in the NFL, he's going to get swallowed up and swamped if he goes inside, but he could have an amazing career and be highly productive if they keep him in that one gap penetrator. If 3-tech or 5-tech.
If this was the 2013 Seahawks defense, he would be the ideal elephant end.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Play that Michael Bennett, Red Bryant role over there. Yep. Oh, yeah. 100%. 100%. One thing I noted about him was that Calijah plays with a different gear. Like, there are guys who are high motor, high effort guys. He makes them look like they're taking plays off. Like, he is whistle to whistle.
Look, it's that little man. It's that little man. He's got to prove himself. And I love that about him. I really do. But like I said, at times it bites him in the butt because he wants to be able to look a guy straight in the face. And that's not, if he takes that out of his game, he'll be fine.
All right. So Calijah is actually my number 3. And then you have Brian Bresee from Clemson as your number 3. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about why you're so high on Brian Bresee.
I'd be higher if he could stay healthy. Look, if he doesn't have injury concerns, he is absolutely my number 2. Because we already talked about how Mazi Smith plays with that ferociousness. So does Brian Bresee. He's a mean man on the gridiron, and that's something you can't teach. You cannot teach that kind of ferocity. If you're just looking for someone that looks like he belongs on a football field, it's kind of hard not to look at this guy. 6'6". This is easily going to be one of the tallest defensive linemen on any team. 6'6". He only weighs 290, or I guess 295. I think he weighed in at 295 at the combine. So he's not small, but this guy could afford to put on some weight. But that 290 is not there's no missed weight on there. That's all muscle. He is a strong dude. We're going to get into the only 2 spots. We'll get into the only other guy that's built better than Brian Bresee, because this guy is just built like a brick. He's strong, tough, mean. Again, if he could stay healthy, he would be my number 2 tackle on this list.
Yeah. He did have some injuries that sort of shortened his 2022 season, but he was also dealing with the death of his sister early in the year. And up until that point, they were dealing with her medical struggles, and that can take a lot out of a person. And I'm not going to say I know what he's going through, but I can imagine that there were probably some mental health issues, not to say that he has any mental health issues, but you going through the grieving process. So yes, he probably focused on football and used his teammates. He's a leader in that locker room. So I'm sure that there are people helping him through it, but that's still something he's got to work through. And so I really kind of looked at his 2021 tape to see the player. And that's why I have him actually as my number 2, because I see what he can be, and I have to just take 2022 and look at the situations and circumstances that surround it. He had those nagging injuries, and I think it was an ankle. There were some.
Yeah, there was an ankle. There was also a hamstring, and then there was another injury in his first year, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, and when you have big guys and you have lower extremity injuries, those can kind of snowball, and so you have to take time. You have to get those lower extremity injuries right, and so that's why, like I said, I look at his 2021 to see what he can be. He has good athleticism, and it matches what we see on the tape. He's going to be a 3-tech if he adds some more weight, gets his functional strength a little bit higher. Not that it's bad. He plays with good functional.
No, the man. This man's a physical freak. You couldn't ask for someone that's bigger, faster, or stronger than Bryan Bresee.
No. So, but what I'm saying is he could kick farther inside to play either 1-tech or nose if he puts on a little bit of weight. He's a little bit undersized to kick all the way in, but I like him at the 3-tech. I think that's a good spot for him. And he plays with a good base. There are times when he'll get swallowed up by a double team because he is playing at that 290, 285, 290 kind of weight range. So one thing he needs to work on is getting that anchor point solid and standing up those offensive linemen instead of letting himself get rocked backwards. But other than that, he's my number 2 for a reason. Really big on Bryan Bresee.
Yeah, but the only reason I have Mazzy at my number 2 again is because there's no health concerns with Mazi Smith, and he also is one of those guys that just plays angry on the gridiron. Another big physical guy. So that's the only reason I have Mazi Smith higher than Bryan Bresee, is just that injury concern that had to knock him down for me. So.
And that's a fair point. It's definitely part of the calculus that goes into drafting NFL players.
I was told there would be no math. I was told there would be no math, Robbie.
Well, I'm telling you, test is coming later. All right. So coming in at number 1 is probably no surprise.
Shock.
We both have Jalen Carter from Georgia ranked as our number 1 interior defensive lineman. I know there are questions, right? We'll get that out of the way first. Are there maturity issues? I mean, he's in his early 20s. I probably wasn't the most mature at my early 20s, but he had that street racing. He had that street racing incident, which led to the death of a teammate and a team staffer. And what isn't talked about enough is there were multiple players involved in that crash, because I believe there were 4 people in the car that crashed, and I might be mistaken, but I think there was at least one more player in with Jalen Carter.
I think there were 2. I think there were 2 because there was a I'm pretty sure there was a passenger ticketed as well. So I think there was 2, but just yeah.
So for me, that incident could have ended up being a whole lot worse. Obviously, you never want to see something this tragic happen. And it's already been adjudicated. There are still draft scouts, draft analysts who talk about, oh, we'll have to see what happens out of this incident. Listen, it's done. Paperwork signed, submitted. They know what it is. It's a year probation, like 1,000 hours community service, something like that. Like, it's been adjudicated already. But does that question his maturity? Is this player somebody who can come into the NFL and be able to act like an NFL player? Right? That it's a huge question mark. And that's something that I can't answer because I haven't interviewed the man. Right? I haven't been able to sit down and see what he's learned through the incident.
You didn't get your press pass for the Code? That didn't come in?
That didn't come in. Yeah, I wasn't able to get an interview with Jalen Carter. But that's something the teams have done their homework on. So that's not a question that I have because I know the teams have already gone out and answered it. And so if the Seahawks go out and get Jalen Carter at 5, because interior defensive line is, in my opinion, our number one need, I won't have a problem with it because I have faith that the team has gone out and answered that maturity question. Plus, we have amazing leadership in our locker room that we can bring a guy up instead of worrying that he's going to drag players down. And I think that's how the Seahawks locker room is built.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's any points that I could possibly disagree with you on. The only questions about Jalen Carter are all off-field issues. There is no question about whether or not Jalen Carter is the best player in this draft on the field. There's none. Anybody who has anybody higher than Jalen Carter on their list, it's a positional thing, and that's the only reason. If they have a quarterback hired, that's a positional thing, and that's it. Jalen Carter is the best prospect in this draft. You go back, you look at his on-the-field play. Georgia was a stacked team. And we've already talked about several Georgia players, whether it be edge rushers like Nolan Smith, or we've talked about Stetson Bennett, their quarterback. That was a stacked team. There's nothing but standout players on that team. So to have a guy that literally stole the spotlight from everybody else on that team says something. Jalen Carter is the best prospect in this draft. Now, look, after he didn't work out at the combine because of the issue, the legal issues, and then obviously not being able to show up on his pro day. Sorry, he was there. I don't mean he didn't show up. I meant that he couldn't finish the workouts on his pro day and didn't put up very good numbers at the Georgia Pro Day. But again, we don't have the opportunity to sit down, interview these guys, talk to them. If the Seahawks take Jalen Carter at 5, it's because they've done their homework. I have nothing but faith in Pete Carroll and John Schneider. If they take Jalen Carter, it's because they don't have any questions about his off-field stuff. And if John Schneider and Pete Carroll have no questions about his off-field stuff, neither do I. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I can say.
Yeah. So speaking to that, one thing that you mentioned it about his pro day. I came into the pro day overweight. He had gained weight from the combine, which was just two and a half weeks before. He was out of shape. Going through field work, he didn't complete the field work. He wasn't able to toughen through it. And people were saying he was out of shape. He was winded. That's why he wasn't able to complete it. Listen, we got to go back to what I said about Brian Bresee. You don't know what this man's going through. He literally was just in an incident where two people that he knew and was probably pretty close to lost their life. What, a month and a half before that pro day? You got to give him a chance to process. Now, it's a bad look, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest job interview you're ever going to have. And he essentially looks like he phoned it in. And then his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, didn't do him any favors by telling every team out of the top 10 that he wouldn't take a visit there. And he tried to walk it back and backpedal a little later, saying, oh, well, that's because we have assurances he's going in the top 10. So it's not worth it for other teams to interview him since we know he's going to be gone in the top 10.
Still not a good look. But
it's still not a good look. And it's not a good look on the player. This news breaks, oh, Jalen Carter won't take any visit for teams outside the top 10. Yeah, that's Jalen Carter's name. That's not Drew Rosenhaus's name in that headline. So you got to do the man a favor. And obviously in this situation, his agent is not looking out for the best interest of the player. And that's all I really have to say about that. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Drew Rosenhaus to begin with. He's fantastic at what he does. He's one of the top agents for a reason.
He's a cutthroat dude. He's a cutthroat dude for sure. And yeah, but again, you said it. I've said it. If the Seahawks take Jalen Carter at 5, no one should have no one in the Seahawks Twitterverse, and I know there are going to be people that will, should have any issue, because John Schneider and Pete Carroll know what it's like to take a guy that has off-field concerns and have that not work out for them. They're not going to do it again. They're not going to, guys. Trust me. If they have concerns about Jalen Carter's off-field issues, they're not going to draft him. So if they do draft him, it's because they do not have concerns. And if they don't have concerns, no one else should.
Yep. Now, if you just get back to the scouting stuff on Jalen Carter, if the maturity is not a problem, if the work ethic is not a problem, then you're looking at potentially generational talent at the position.
Yeah,
he could come in and wreck the league like Warren Sapp if those other question marks are answered as fine.
Yeah, we talked about Bryan Bresee's build. Yeah, Bryan Bresee is a physical freak at 6'6", 290 pounds. Jalen Carter weighs 30 pounds more than Bryan, or 20 plus pounds more than Bryan Bresee, and he's just as much of a physical freak. And he's 3 inches shorter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no question. He checks all the box. He can win against one-on-ones. He's got a great first step. Awesome pass rush tools. He's good in the run game. He's better as a pass rusher, but he's also good in the run game. I mean, there's a reason he's number 1. And I have him as my number 1 overall player in this draft.
Because he is. He's the number.
Because he is. Yeah.
He's the number 1 overall player of this draft. And the Seahawks drafted him. They should immediately switch back to the 4-3 and move Draymond to that big elephant position and have Carter rush up from that 5 technique and destroy offensive guards. But that's just not.
Yeah. So there you have it. Those are our top 10 defensive linemen for the 2023 NFL Draft. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll catch you next time. As always, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.